Okay, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Laura Edwards, and on behalf of the Learning Center staff and the General Alumni Association, I would like to welcome you to the 19th Annual Timothy B. and Jane A. Burnett Seminar for Academic Achievement. We are so fortunate to have the opportunity to host this event thanks to the generosity of the Burnett family. The seminar was started by Mr. Timothy Burnett's late mother, Mrs. Juliet Davis, and her late husband, Mr. W. Burke Davis, and ongoing support has been provided by Mr. Timothy Burnett and Mrs. Jane Burnett. The Burnett Seminar allows for us to bring the latest information in the field to people who deserve to hear it the most: neurodiverse teens and young adults, their families, and professionals who work with them. Please join me in thanking and welcoming Timothy and Jane Burnett, who are here with us today. Also with us today are Dr. Abigail Panter, Senior Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education in the College of Arts and Sciences. There she is in the back. Thank you. Dr. Marcus Collins, Associate Dean of the Center for Student Success. And Dr. Kim Abels, Director of the Writing and Learning Center at UNC. It takes the time and talents of many people in order for an event like this to take place. So I would like to take a brief moment to extend my gratitude to many who have contributed their energy and efforts to this event. First, thank you to the Learning Center and Writing Center staff who have all contributed in some way. Can you please stand? Specifically, I would like to thank Franny Brock, Sarah Esposito, and grad students Marcy Pedswater and Sophie Hollis for their tremendous efforts. I would like to thank Robert Biggers and his staff from the Bull's Head Bookstore for being here. And I would also like to thank Paul Lamontang for handling all of our audio and visual needs. Thank you as well to Douglas Payne and Audrey Lyles from the General Alumni Association and to Greg Dills from the Carolina Club for their many contributions. Just for some housekeeping items, our agenda is listed in your program. We will break at 2 o'clock, at which time feel free to enjoy refreshments that will be at the back of the room. If you would like to purchase Eric Garcia's book, it will be for sale up here to my left during the break, and then also at the conclusion of the presentation, at which time Mr. Garcia will be available for book signings. On your seat, you should have an index card. If you have questions for Mr. Garcia, please write them on the index card, and during the break, we will collect those cards. Restrooms are located on both floors, just out the doors and down the hall to the left. If you have any questions about anything, our Learning Center staff is here to assist you, and we are all wearing the light blue name tags. We would like to welcome our online audience as well today. And for the online audience, if you have any questions you would like to submit, you can do so through the Zoom chat. We are thrilled today to have Eric Garcia returning to his alma mater to speak with us. He is a 2014 graduate of UNC, and during his time here, he worked on staff at the Daily Tar Heel. Eric is currently a political journalist in Washington, D.C., and has just published his first book. He has written for the Washington Post Magazine, The Week, The New Republic, The Daily Beast, The American Prospect, and Spectrum. He was recently assistant editor at the Washington Post Outlook section and previously was an associate editor at The Hill. His career has also included being a staff writer for Market Watch, National Journal, and Roll Call. In his recent book, We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation, he uses his experiences as an autistic person to explore how autistic people wrestle with systems that were not built with them in mind, and how autism is part of their identity, that they don't need to be fixed. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Mr. Eric Garcia.
Turn this on right now.
Yep. I will do the same.
Get it out.
Okay. So we have lots of questions for Eric today, and that's what this first part of the presentation will include. He has graciously agreed to share with us his knowledge and experiences. So we will get started.
Sure.
You note in your book that it's a message from autistic people to help their parents, friends, teachers, doctors, and researchers see a side of autism that they may not have considered. What prompted you to write this book?
This is a really funny story. Well, first off, I just want to say thank you to UNC, to Carolina. I brought my Carolina blue tie just in case. Go Heels. All of you are feeling pretty good after that football game last weekend. This is coming home, and the Learning and Writing Center, I read about it in my book. I wouldn't be where I am without the Learning and Writing Center. So thank you very much to the Learning and Writing Center. This is an important place. The way that this book came about is I was a reporter at National Journal at the time, and was perfectly happy being, I covered economics and politics. So I was perfectly happy doing that for the rest of my life. There's an alternative reality out there where I'm just doing that and I'm fine and I'm happy. What happened was I went to a party in 2015. But I got the name of Tim Mack, and he offered me a drink. And I said, oh, I don't drink because I'm on the autism spectrum. And he said, instead of him saying, oh, come on, have a drink with me, he said, oh, there are a lot of autistic people in Washington. And he says, you should write something about that. And that at the time, this was like in 2015, I was just out of college. I graduated in 2014. And I was like, when I get good at being a journalist, I'll do that. And then what happened was the print magazine decided to shut down, or the print magazine shut down because the owner decided to shut it down. And then our editor, the editor of the print magazine, Richard Just, said, I just want these kind of go for broke pieces. Just any idea you have, nothing's sacred, let's do it. So I pitched this idea to him about like what the secret lives of autistic people in Washington. I thought it'd be kind of like a fun, chatty kind of talk of the town piece. And then but Richard, and what a good editor does, he challenged me. He's like, why should this piece exist? I said, well, I think we focus too much on trying to cure autistic people instead of trying to help them live fulfilling lives. It's like, there's your piece, 10,000 words, go. And I was like, okay. And I walked out. I was like, what did I just commit to? But then what was interesting is that while I was doing that, two things were happening. If you remember, this is in 2015. I don't know if you remember, there was that measles outbreak at Disneyland, like back in 2015. And, it was because parents weren't vaccinating their kids with the measles shot. And then conversely, what was interesting is that, I'm a political journalist in my day job, is that Donald Trump was running for president. And in one of the debates, he talked about how autism is becoming an epidemic. And that was, and what was interesting to me is I was like, okay, I grew up in Southern California. I know those people who don't vaccinate their kids. They're not conservatives. They're a bunch of hippie liberals. And then, Trump, he may be an unorthodox conservative or an unorthodox Republican, but he's a Republican nonetheless. And what that said to me was the discussions about autism, specifically in politics, were so disconnected from the daily realities that autistic people live. And my feeling was, well, if we're just talking about vaccines, if we're just talking about curing autistic people, that must mean we're failing a lot of autistic people. So, I wrote that piece, and then the next question was, arguing that we shouldn't try to cure autistic people. But then the next question, I met the person to become my agent, and I thought, and she said, like, well, what's the next question? I said, well, what does it look like to be autistic in America? How do our misunderstandings about autism create these gaps and these failures for autistic people? And that really kind of prompted this the next step. So what I did is I kind of hit the road. I went to West Virginia, I went to Michigan, I went to Nashville, Tennessee, I went to Pittsburgh, I went to the Bay Area, California. And I went to, I looked around our nation's capital, like where I live. And I really just tried to get a good idea of what, a full idea of what is it like to be autistic across America? And I think that's really what prompted it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Um, well, you also wrote that autistic people have been forced to navigate a world where all the road signs are written in another language. Can you tell us some more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, that is, that was also a little bit of my editor's flourish. So, but I think that, but the reason why I said that was essentially autistic people have to navigate. If you think about it, autism was first used as a term in around 1908 to 1911 by a Swiss psychiatrist named Eugen Bleuler. And he thought of it as and it was initially thought of as a symptom of schizophrenia. What was interesting is that I went back when I was researching this book, I went back and I looked at old magazine and news articles in like Time Magazine and Newsweek, because like a friend of mine said, that's a good way. My friend of mine, Jonathan Cohn, said like, that's a good way to get an understanding of the zeitgeist at the time. And what was interesting was I was reading how interchangeably the terms autism and childhood schizophrenia were used for so long. And it was because autism didn't get its own separate diagnosis, separate from schizophrenia and the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, until 1980. So if you think about it, that's from 1911 to 1980. And what happened was, in that interim time, of course, you had Leo Connor's study at Johns Hopkins University. You had Hans Asperger, who we now know was kind of a Nazi, doing his studies look up, go home tonight and Google Hans Asperger, Nazi Vienna. Like it's horrible. He sent kids to their death. The Ken Burns documentary, I think, talks about this a little bit. But what that said to me was, for so long there were, this world wasn't built with autistic people in mind. And then on top of that, a lot of the people who wrote the kind of rules or the ideas or the concepts about autism were theorized in the initial studies. They did it without autistic people in mind, or they did it without thinking about how they would react or having their input, because for the longest time, it was seen as a form of childhood psychosis. And if you think that, and if society thinks that something's a product of psychosis, they're not going to take autistic people's needs seriously, and they're going to build these things around them without actually listening to them. So that's really what I meant to say.
Yeah, and I think your book points that out so well, because you did a great job of getting the viewpoints of many autistic people and really bringing those to the forefront. So that was helpful.
Yeah.
What do you feel like what do you think is important for teachers and instructors to know about working with autistic students in high school and in college?
I think what I would say is that we were just talking about this at lunch, we were just talking about this today, is that I think that a lot of teachers and educators, first off, I should say that like a lot of teachers and educators are doing what they're doing with very little resources. So let's be real about that. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was signed in 1990, the year I was born, literally like 6 weeks before I was born. And the federal government was supposed to fund about 40% of all disability education in the United States. It spent about 14.6%, depending on what study you read. So that means that states had to shoulder the cost, and they have less money. So let's get that out in the open, that educators aren't bad. A lot of times a lot of times we're on the same side, even if there seems to be like this kind of tension. So let's get that out of the way. Second of all, I think that what we should say is that, a lot of times there's this desire to think that asking for accommodations is asking for special treatment. That's why I'm not a fan of the term special education, really, because I think that it implies almost like special treatment, when really what it is, it's about equal treatment. It's about making sure that they're on the same playing field in building a classroom and an environment that is inclusive, that allows them to thrive. And when you recognize that, then you can recognize that they're capable of doing really, really incredible things. So I think that's the thing that I would say is that I would say is that assume that your disabled students or your neurodivergent students are capable of just as many great things as your neurotypical students, and are as capable of having as many difficulties as challenges as your neurotypical students. So start from that same baseline, and then ask the question about, what can I do to make this a more inclusive environment? How do I get their input? How do I take what they're saying seriously? I think that's the most important thing.
So true. And what were some of the specific ways that your teachers and instructors supported you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's really important. I think that when I was in K-12, I did like special education, things like that. But what's interesting is that I think that by the time I went into university, so first off, I went to community college before I went to UNC. I think I didn't really want to ask for accommodations because, like, I think that by the time students with disabilities get to college, they see how onerous it is to get that slice, that little sliver from the 14.6%. So they're kind of like, I don't want to do this, you know, and at least that's what I think. Like, anybody here felt that way? Yeah. So I think that what they do is that they kind of just don't want to ask it. And that also, there's just, you know, and we were talking about this, Mr. and Ms. Burnett, we were talking about this during lunch, is that I think that also a lot of students don't want to be singled out, and they don't want to feel like, oh, well, I'm just, you know, they don't want to be ostracized. They don't want people to single them out. They don't want their teachers or their educators to single them out. So like, I think when I went to, so like when I was at community college, my mom was like, you're going to get special education, you're going to get accommodations. But when I went to university, when I went to North Carolina, and I should say that, like, I grew up in Southern California, so like about as far away from North Carolina as you can get. I came for the better sports and the better food. So, you know, you know, I think that what I thought was, I think that, like, so when my dad was helping me set up, and, like, you know, you go through all the orientation, I was a transfer student. I don't think that we necessarily overlooked, you know, we didn't intentionally overlook accommodations like that. I think it was like, we were kind of overwhelmed when we forgot. But I think also the other thing was, like, I was almost kind of like, well, I'm here, I made it. Like, I don't need accommodations because I'm not, quote unquote, that disabled. How many students with disabilities feel that way sometimes? Yeah, like, and what that does, though, is that I think that it makes you think, A, there's no such thing as not disabled enough or too disabled or not. Like it's not a gradation. Your disability is a disability. But B, I think that, like, I think that there's this feeling that, like, if you make it to university, you must not really be that disabled, or you must not need that many accommodations. What I think ultimately happened was, and I was talking about this earlier with you, is that I was taking one of my gen ed classes here at UNC. It was a guy by the name of Dr. David Peer. It was not even for my major. It was for an African music class for my arts credit. And I remember you had to match a country with the music, that match a country with the song that they were playing. And I'd studied all night for this, but then, like, what happened is I just drew a blank. So then I know I bombed that test. So I went to his office after work. And this was like the day fall break started, for those who don't understand. And, like, so I went to him just, like, shaking, and I was just like, Doc, professor, I have this, like, I broke down, like, I need it. And then, like, what he did, and I'll never forget this, instead of him writing me off, he made a phone call. He said, the Writing and Learning Center is ready for you. Go now. And I remember it was rainy. I remember it was overcast, whatever. And, like, it was Dr. Teresa Maitland, who I know is retired, but, like, she became my guidance counselor. And, like, I've worked with her all 3 years while I was there. So, by the way, like, for those, like just give a round of applause for Teresa Maitland. Like, she was just amazing. This community, and, like, I wouldn't be where I am without her. I hope she's watching on the live stream. But I think that that was incredibly important. I think that was necessary in a lot of ways. But also, I think that, like, what that did is it helped me map out and game out how I can manage my time, how I can manage it. Because, like, this is my first time going to, like, I'd lived a little bit on my own when I interned at the White House, but like, this is my first time, like, going to school by myself, like, not living at home or things like that. And it was just complete chaos. And I think a lot of people feel that way. So like that was a resource, but like I think about it and I think like how many things had to go right for that? Like imagine if, I had a professor who wasn't that accepting or didn't get it immediately. Imagine if the Learning Center had been closed that day. Imagine if imagine if there hadn't been enough resources, or if you needed to sign up at the beginning of the year, how many things would needed to go right for that. And I think that's the thing that I think about a lot. Those what ifs kind of make me think about that. And then I think about like how many people didn't make it through those what ifs.
Right. And you talk a lot about how you did not come, when you came to Carolina, you didn't have accommodations at first. But clearly you got to that point where you were like, okay, I need some help, and it worked out for you. So I know you talked about the academic coaching with Teresa Maitland was kind of your sanctuary and your war room.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. Like how was that a helpful service?
It was important because like we would just come up with different study tactics. Like I remember one tactic we did that worked out really well was we did this thing called subject hopping, which was every night when I would do my homework, I would I would go from one place to another. So like I was like, okay, I would do history at Davis Library, or I would do I was taking Arabic at the time. Like that was my foreign language. So like I'd take Arabic and I'd do it like in the common area of my dorm, where I would, or if I needed to do psychiatry or psychology, like like I did it at the student union, FBG student union, just having designated areas, and then like having like obviously giving myself as much time as I needed to study like that one subject, but like having it so that like I was always having that kind of stimuli, because on top of being autistic, I'm also ADHD. I also have ADHD. So like having that kind of stimuli, but then also her saying like, oh, have you gone to their office hours? And I was like, you can go to office hours, like taking into account on top of this, like not only like am I going to a new environment, like my dad went to college, like he got his degree online long after I was born, long after I was a kid, like, but before then he was a dropout at East Carolina University. My mom got her GED. So like college and university was like, I think like until my cousin Andrea, who played soccer at Baylor, graduated from Baylor, like I think the highest someone in my family had gotten was my Aunt Stella, who had taken a few years at UCLA before she dropped out. So like that just wasn't something that, there were just things that like I thought like, oh, you can go to their office hours, like that's not going to bug them. When like we know studies show that like first generation students don't go to office hours, whereas like people who might be legacy inmates or like they might be trust fund kids and like that, they're more prone to use it. So that was another thing. It's like, oh wait, you can do this, and then like that leads to the question of asking for accommodations. So like I remember one time, like I was taking my economics, so like I got a C in economics. So like even like, and I wound up covering economics and business in my first job in journalism. So like, don't tell anybody you can't do anything. But like I'm just hoping I didn't cause any market crashes at all with my work. Like, not as much as Liz Truss in the UK government right now. But like I remember that led me and that encouraged me, so that when I was taking my econ reporting class, Chris Roush, who left a few years ago, but I'm sure some people might know still, like I went to him and I said, look, I have a disability. If you ever need to shut me up, or if you ever need to do this, like please just give me a signal or wink or nod like in class. And he said, and he never did, but like it was good to know that I could do that, and that I could disclose to a professor. And that was so important. And I think that I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to do that had it not been for the Writing and Learning Center.
Yeah, so that took a lot of trust in the Writing and Learning Center and in your work with Teresa, but then also in your professors.
Yeah. It required a lot of trust. And I think that one of the things that but like one of my friends who I interviewed in the book, M. Remy Yergo, they're non-binary, so I'm using they them pronouns. When they were going through grad school, I believe initially people didn't believe that they were disabled when they asked for accommodations, because it's like, well, you're here, you must not be disabled. And it's this really frustrating, almost like kind of tautology. So it's like, you're here, so you must not be disabled, but like, I'm here because I got accommodations, so like it creates this really frustrating friction and tension. And I think that goes to the point that like a lot of, so like Reading Learning Center people might be willing, but like a lot of professors, especially if that isn't their field, they might not necessarily be open or receptive, or even, like they might, even if it is their field, they must, because they have a lot of outdated or outmoded ideas about autism, they must have a really, they have a really antiquated idea and they don't really take it seriously. Like one of my really good friends, Devin Price, who has a great book you should read called Unmasking Autism. I don't know, have you read it yet?
I have not.
You should read it. You should get Devin here. He's fantastic. He's a professor of psychology, and when he was in graduate school, like because he studied about autism, he was like, no, that's not me, like so even especially in that field, sometimes people, because they have kind of outdated ideas, they might think, well, you can't be disabled. So I think it's really important to have professors take these things seriously, even if you don't necessarily understand it. You should take it at face value.
Excellent point. So in addition to your support systems, you also describe how you and a few others succeeded in college because of systems in place that enabled you to succeed. Can you talk more about those systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that the Writing and Learning Center existed, had I gone to a university where that didn't exist, I don't think I would be where I am today. Or had there not been this history, like, it wasn't until later that I learned about, it wasn't until long after I graduated, I learned about like the history of Teach here at UNC.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't learn about all the history of the conferences and like how this was kind of one battleground of like the autism wars in the 90s and in the 1980s and 1990s. Mm-hmm. So like, not to say that university is perfect. God knows, if you look at my Twitter feed, I criticize the university a lot, but like, but because I love it, I wouldn't smack talk the university if I didn't adore this place. Like it wasn't until later that I learned like, oh, this was kind of like, there's this understanding because there's this history here. Like this was where a lot of those battles were fought, but like in the same respect, like I think about like Hari Srinivasan, who I interviewed in the book, he just graduated from UC Berkeley. So he lives in the Bay Area, and people who know about disability history know that like the Bay Area is to disability rights what Woolworths here was, like not too far from here, was to the civil rights movement. It was the beginning of the sit-ins and things like that. So like there was this, so like by virtue of him going to Berkeley, there was that history of understanding about disability, and there were those accommodations that like our forebears fought hard for. So like, that's not, so it's not necessarily saying that, oh, this place was, built this way. It was because like people before me, generations before me of autistic people and their loved ones and their parents fought like hell to build a place like this. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's important to keep in mind. Whereas like, I think about like, there's another person I profile in the book. She goes by a pseudonym, but Aria, so like, well, I should say like Hari Srinivasan, he's non-speaking. Now he's at grad school at Vanderbilt University. So like a lot of people would think that he's quote unquote low functioning, because I think that's why I'm not a fan of the term high functioning or low functioning, because like he can't speak. But like, if you graduate from Berkeley, you're not low functioning in anything. Whereas like this woman, Aria, who I profile in the book, she is married, she has kids, but she kind of crashed and burned at college, because there weren't a lot of those supports. And she went undiagnosed because, as we know, that women and girls don't get diagnosed as much, or they get overlooked as much, or they get overlooked way more than boys do. So that's something to take into account. But like those systems weren't in place, and as a result, college didn't work out for her. And like, but like I see the fact that she's a mom and she's a wife and things like that. I'm just like, she could have done something had there been, the right support systems in place. And in the same way, it's like, Hari was able to do this because people actually believed that it was possible. So, when I say that systems in place, like I'm trying to think of how not to get in trouble. The way that I'm trying to say this is that I think that it's really easy to look at me and just say, "Oh, you're like." It's don't get me wrong, I'm honored to be here, but it's easy to look at me and say that, "Oh, I'm so inspirational. I overcame these odds. I overcame all these things, and like now I'm here speaking before you." And don't get me wrong, I worked hard to get here, but I wouldn't be able to be here. Like again, I think about the fact that I was born in 1990, the year the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed by, I should say, a Republican president with a Democratic House, Democratic Senate. Last year the late Bob Dole passed away. Earlier this year, Orrin Hatch passed away. Conservative Republicans who helped pass the ADA through the Senate. I don't think that can happen today. And so like I think about like I said, weeks before I was born, the ink wasn't even dry on the IDEA when I came out of the womb. So like I think that like that was specific governmental policies that said we are going to include people with disabilities, and they weren't perfect, but there was a specific promise in the letter of the law that opened those doors. In the same way, I think that the Burnett people, like the Burnett family, building systems and building organizations right here, and helping build the Writing and Learning Center here. And that was a system that was put in place. These things don't happen on accident. It's like, there's this old saying, Bill Clinton's fond of saying it like, if you see a turtle on a fence post, the turtle didn't get there on its own, So in the same way that like, if I'm doing this dog and pony show, it wasn't because I did it on my own.
Yeah. And you talk also about, in addition to the systems in place, that you also found your community while you were here at UNC. I know for you, it sounds like the Daily Tar Heel was a big part of that community, but can you talk to us a little bit about how you went about finding your community here in a big place like this?
Yeah. So, I think it's really, I think this is important. This is an important way to talk about some other things. So like, if you don't mind, I kind of riffing on that.
Okay.
So like I think my first year I was just kind of treading water, like that was my sophomore year, because of my credits and transfer over from Chapel College. And I was just it was just kind of just struggling to survive. So then the next year, Dr. Maitland was kind of like, you're a journalism major. Would you want to get involved in something? And then I thought, okay, well, why don't I try joining the Daily Tar Heel? Like, because I'm a journalism major, I should try doing that. Instead, I thought I might want to do broadcast. I wanted to do, but then, or Carolina Week. But then I thought, like, I don't like being on TV, so I'm a better writer. So I did that. And then, like, I think that it was again having that encouragement and kind of having that nudge along that helped me. And I think that it was really important. Like I don't tell my professors at the Hussman School, but I think I learned more about journalism at the Daily Tar Heel than I did at the journalism school. Back then we used to call it the J School. That was and I still call it the J School. But like I remember. That was where I learned kind of the craft of journalism. That was where I learned about it as a trade. And that was like where and then like, what was the thing of it was that because I was studying journalism at the time, these were people who I would, go to class with in the daytime. And then I would go and then, in the evening, I'd go to the DTH and file my stories, and then I'd sometimes cut out of class to do an interview to do an interview sometimes, or going. I think one time I did an interview in the bathroom one time, like just with my laptop and my phone, or just find or a basement somewhere, wherever you could get a reception and you could type up, and then like I would go to the DTH and I would file, and then like And then like, that was, you'd be like, oh, I got on the front page, and that was super cool. And then like, you got kind of affirmation. Then you were like, oh, these people care about the same stuff you care about. And then, what would happen is like, oh, on the weekends you'd party together. And like, I used to joke that like when I was at the Daily Tar Heel, used to joke that it was the cheapest frat on campus. So like, you know, it was like, so like these were people who I would befriend, who I would go to class with, who I would work with, and who became my friends. And like to this day, like I'm still really good. I had lunch with one of my really good friends this last weekend. I'm the godfather of one of my former coworker's child.
Wow.
I'm her godfather. I'm planning to get her a stuffed sheep or something like that at the airport because next month's her birthday, is my goddaughter's birthday. So like, yeah, that was very much my community, and it was like, but it was like, it was really different. Like I wouldn't have done that had not been for the Learning Center encouraging me, because like I think that it's important to recognize, like studies have shown that one of the difficult things for autistic students, and I'm guessing otherwise neurodivergent students, is like the main challenge at colleges and universities isn't the academics. So the academics are difficult. It's the socialization part that's really difficult, because there's not that kind of, there isn't that preset kind of thing like there is in high school or K-12. And that's also what kind of leads to a lot of suicidality and suicidal ideation with autistic and otherwise neurodivergent students. And I know that that's kind of grim to talk about, but we need to talk about it. We need to talk about community, because like when you think about when you think about the things that save people from suicide, it's community. It's not just it's helplessness. And what's the best antidote to helplessness? It's having people who will help you and who will love you. So like, I mean, I think that that's really important to have community, and it's really important to connect, because that's something that's kind of a foreign language to a lot of neurodivergent people. It's important to have that, sometimes have that nudge or that kind of linkage.
Yeah, and so for you, it sounds like that community was important from a social standpoint,
Absolutely.
but then also from a supportive standpoint, to be there when you needed them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like, yeah, those people are my friends. Those people are still people who I rely on to this day. Like, they're my friends, and they're people who like I consider close. To in more ways than just work. They're my family. Like I didn't have any family when I moved here. So like they became my family.
Mm-hmm. So for autistic students entering college or entering UNC or any college for that fact, what would you say your 3 maybe top tips for them would be?
I would say ask for accommodations.
Okay.
And if they don't exist, build. This is like, if there isn't that space already, carve it out for yourself, because then there will be other people who need them in the future, and that's always good.
Mm-hmm.
So like, and also be upfront, be honest with yourself about it. Also find community wherever you find a way to build that community, or go to your guidance counselor or something like that. Find those people who you need. And I think the other thing is recognize is that again, this is kind of repetitive, but I think it shouldn't necessarily be on the onus of the students to be the ones to change things. But I think it's one of the things is that, like, especially if you're the first of that group to do it, or if there aren't a lot of systems, like, yeah, you kind of do have to educate the people, and you have to change opinions, or even systems that are in place that didn't necessarily have autistic input. It's kind of, don't be afraid to be the person who kind of disrupts it. So I think that's the other thing, is like, don't be afraid to disrupt things. And if you see something that isn't fitting you, or if you see something and people just do it because that's the way that it was done, but you're seeing it's clearly not working for you, or it's not working for other people, don't be afraid to be outspoken. I think one of the things that helps about being autistic, I think as a journalist, I can say just honestly, is that I don't have a lot of tolerance for people who just kind of obfuscate or recognize we just do this because we always do this, I think that helps me as a journalist to be curious and inquisitive and question systems and structures. And in the same way, I don't have a lot of, because social niceties are kind of a foreign language to me. In the same way, I think that can be a way for you to kind of, for you, especially if you're a student, we're in a place where that isn't really forgiving, to change things, and because you don't necessarily, you're not, obviously you want to be empathetic, you don't want to be rude, you don't want to be mean, but you by you not necessarily seeing social niceties as a norm, as a native language, that can allow you to question things and disrupt things in a way that can be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. Your insight and your comments, I think, are so helpful and help us all think about autism in a different way. And so, thank you for sharing your insights and your personal stories. We appreciate it. So we'll take a little more time, maybe one more question. Let's go with where and when did you learn how to advocate for yourself? And can you give examples of how you have advocated for yourself?
I think that the way that I'll let you know when I finally get good at doing that. I think a lot of times, I think that example with David Pierre was an example, but it's an ongoing thing. I think one of the things that when I only disclosed it when because I needed to, but I didn't. Everybody it was only on a need to know basis. It was only and then again, I kind of needed to do it when I was crashing and burning when I was at my first job at Market Watch. I needed to advocate for myself, and I said look, and I realized that it was difficult being in a newsroom where there was a lot of noise because that was sensory overload, and it wasn't. And a lot of times I would not, and a lot of times or when I would get instructions when there was a lot of hints or there was a lot of in between the lines, and I was no, I need you to tell me these things specifically for now. I think it's a lot of times, unfortunately, I talked about this one with you earlier. Unfortunately, I think one of the things that happens is that we tend to neurodivergent people often only get the services they need once they reach their limit and once they reach their brink. And they almost never get it from the get-go, or they often don't feel like they need to at the get-go because there's so much shame around it or there's so much misunderstanding about it. And it's only until you're at your last leg that you're that people are fine, okay, we'll give you just a little bit as a treat, I think that that's kind of important, is that having it from the get-go. But I think that I'm still learning, and I think that especially now, I think now that if you look up my name or if you Google me now that's the first thing. I used to be able to kind of do it clandestinely, it was only on a need to know basis. And I in some ways I kind of liked that. Now it's okay, sorry, anybody with a rudimentary amount of Googling skills will see that I'm autistic. So now I kind of have to ask for it. Or I kind of say I can do this, but I can't do that. But it's one of those things where I still need to get comfortable constantly doing it. So I don't say I'm good at advocating for myself. I'm saying that I'm still learning about how I can do that and still kind of dealing with, if you think about it, it took me until I was 25 to be comfortable talking about autism. That's 25 years. It's probably going to take just as much time, if not longer, to unlearn that.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a continuing growth process as you go along. Your story includes how you embraced your autistic identity. What was this process like for you and for the others that you interviewed?
It's interesting you mentioned the others. It was interviewing autistic people that helped me embrace my identity. Actually, incidentally enough, it was the first time that I remember disclosing to somebody who wasn't. When I was in a social group, was at one time. It was a Thursday night when we were at the DT, and I read about this in the book. The DTH, we had just put the newspaper to bed, and we went to Linda's, and I wasn't, because at the time I didn't drink, but a few of my friends were a little hydrated, let's just say it, put it that way. So we needed to sober up, and so we went to the DTH office before. And this was back in the day when I could stay out till 3 or 4. I can't do it anymore. I'm old. I'm in my 30s, but I remember one time I said I can't drive because I'm on the autism spectrum, and then I said I think I have Asperger's, and then somebody who's now become a friend said, "Oh, you are? Me too." And I was oh, and that was such a freeing and liberating moment, because I was I would still, afterward, I still got invited to go out with my friends. I still got invited to hang out with people. There wasn't that weird why. So I think, but then I think that when I met and when I traveling across the country, interviewing autistic people, because I think for the longest time, I was really self-conscious about being autistic. I thought, oh, I'm not autistic enough, or I'm not the right kind of autistic, or I didn't come into, autism acceptance, or neurodiversity until much later in life. I was kind of felt like, I was always, I'm Mexican American. I'm very proud of that heritage. But I've always kind of had this real anxiety about being Hispanic, because I don't speak Spanish fluently. I'm third generation American. I'm pretty assimilated. I grew up in the suburbs of Southern California. Like, I always felt like, I'd much rather listen to Black Sabbath than Bad Bunny, but, and I like Bad Bunny, but, and it wasn't until like I got older that I realized like there's plenty of ways to be Hispanic in America. By meeting other Hispanics and other Latinos, but and in the same way, I think that it was by meeting other autistic people, interviewing them, profiling their lives, seeing how wide and diverse that the spectrum is, and that autistic people affect autism as much as autism affects them. I think that really kind of helped me shed kind of that kind of internalized ableism and that internalized shame, because then also what I recognize is that I was like, oh, a lot of these things that I thought were bad or deficient about me, like not understanding social niceties, like stimming. Like, I mean, I don't know if like look what I'm doing right now with my ring. I'm stimming right now. I wouldn't be, I think for the longest time there was a lot of shame around doing this for me, where because I was just like, why, people, like even my mom would say like, why are you tapping your feet? Why are you twiddling your thumbs when I was a kid? And like, it was like, what I realize now is like, the only way I'm able to sit on this stage and talk with you is by doing this, is by constantly stimming, because it's a form of self-soothing, and it was because like when I would interview autistic people in their settings, like people would have fidget cubes, or they'd have something they'd stim with, or if you notice I'm not making a lot of eye contact with you, like it's because when I would interview people, like they sometimes they wouldn't make eye contact with me, or they talk to me with their eyes closed, or things like that, or they wouldn't, or they would kind of go on tangents. And so like all these things that I thought were bad or deficient, I learned were really just variations of being human, and that was, I think, really soothing. So in a way, I don't think that you should write books just for therapy, but like I think that like I think that you should write to inform people. But I think that but in a weird way, it was very therapeutic, and it was a very important task for me to kind of reconcile these things in my past.
Yeah, well, and your book clearly has lots of information in it. Great information for all of us, in addition to the therapeutic process that maybe it was for you. You mentioned this earlier, but you openly share in your book that you experienced loneliness and became suicidal while at UNC. And you said, certainly in addition to calling the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, you noted 3 things that saved you: your bonds to other people, and we've talked a little bit about that, your sense of duty, and then your ties to those around you. Can you tell us a little bit more about those things? I know we've talked some about that sense of community, but
so like when I before I went to UNC, like I got into a really messy thing. I don't even know if it was a relationship with a woman, and like it got me really depressed, and like I got really suicidal. The thing, I was like literally this close to killing myself. And then what happened is like I overheard in the other room my sister screaming because she got into the university she wanted to. And I remember thinking to myself, I want to be there when she graduates. And funny story is that my sister graduated literally the day before I did at Loyola Marymount University. So they took a plane and literally, they took a red eye and they got to Keenan Stadium literally as the ceremony was starting, because like there had been a delay or something like that. So like my sister and I got to graduate a day apart. So like that was really important to me, the world, because I graduated a year later, because it took time off, to go intern at the White House, and because of credits transferring. I think the other one, because I sense of duty, and I think it was my ties to other people. Yeah, I think that was really important, because like and the other thing, like, and then when I got really depressed at UNC, the thing that literally kept me from killing myself was like, was that when I was getting back from winter break, I had a big piece that I needed to turn in for the DTH. It's like, it was literally like, I didn't want to let my editors down. I didn't want to let my friends down. that literally being on deadline saved my life. So I think that I might have learned the wrong lessons for that when I was in adulthood, that like I tied, work with love, and that sometimes is a bad and unhealthy thing. But like in other ways, that kind of saved my life. It was because these were people who I loved and they loved me, that I didn't want to let them down. So like that was incredibly important to me. I don't think that I don't think that I'd be alive if it wasn't for the love of people like my friends who I met here.
Yeah. So that sense of community was really super important on many levels, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I think that if I were to say to anybody who's dealing with suicide, is that you deserve more than. I'm gonna say it because I don't care if I get in trouble. You deserve more than the shit that's going on in your head. That's just all I'm gonna say. Like you deserve more than what's going on in your head. Everybody does. So,
yeah.
Pardon my French, but like that's just a moment of realness.
So and again, we've talked about this some, but at UNC, your involvement with the Daily Tar Heel certainly was where you found that strong sense of community. And you've also found it, some sense of community in the working world, it sounds like. Do you have any suggestions for other autistic people who are looking for their community?
Ooh, that is a really good question, because I am not good at this.
Okay.
No, I mean, because like I've made the mistake of sometimes tying my identity to my work, and I should say that I should say, learn from me and learn from like my mistakes. Like, don't tie your identity to your work. Like that is really important. I think that like a lot of autistic people, especially because like oftentimes our work is the only place we meet people and we get affirmation, and like because meeting friends is hard. Like it's really easy, and I've made that mistake far too many times where like I've wrapped myself at the expense of myself, at the expense of my health, at the expense of my own personal life, of like tying myself to my work and thinking that my worth was tangential to the work that I was putting out. So like I'd say that's important. But I think one of the things that I would say is that like, so like your work isn't your job isn't your family. Like as I've said, like as my friend, as my friend, as a guy I know, Spencer Ackerman, who's a national security journalist, says like your newsroom isn't your crew. But and I say it's like, so my office, those aren't my people. But the people who I met really good friends in my newsroom, and like those people are my crew,
Right.
To the extent I have a crew. But like but the point being is that like I do have people, and I still have people who like I can go to talk about things. So like one of my first jobs with the National Journal, with that bank, and one of my mentors was a guy by the name of Ron Fournier, and his son Tyler was on the autism spectrum. And I reached out to him when I was a student here at UNC, because he'd written a story about his son being autistic, and like we became friendly, and he pushed for me to get a job at National Journal, and that was led to me writing that piece. It was like he was a person who I could go to, and then also he could give me advice. And like what's interesting is that like sometimes my bosses would go up to him and say, Eric is great, but like sometimes he goes off on tangents and things like that. And they're like, what do we do? They say, well, just tell him. And then they kind of had like these winks and nods or these signals to make sure that I didn't go off too much. So like that was really important. And I think that it's important to have people who you can go to, like, and then in the same respect, I think the other point is, I'm trying to say this the right way, is that like, it's always important to have like, even if whether you have it in your direct office or if you have it in like outside your office, and sometimes having it outside the office can be good because then it's not wrapped up in work. Is that like having people who you can bounce off of and sound off on, whether it's your parents or whether it's your friends or whether it's your brother or your sister or whatever, or your siblings, having people who you could have a game plan with and map these out with, I think that's incredibly important. Like I'll give you I was at a really big newspaper one time, early in my career. And I remember what happened was I was part of the union. So like I remember someone in a work meeting proposed we publish an article written by someone who used autism in a pejorative sense. It's a pejorative word. And then like this was a supervisor of mine. And I didn't know what I was just like, it was, it was unacceptable in my eyes. But I didn't want to be, for lack of a better term, the pissed off disabled person. So I remember I went into the union group chat or the union Slack, and I mentioned this. And then one of my coworkers, great guy, he said, I mentioned it to him, and he was like, yeah, that's BS. He used a lot more vulgar words than that. But he said, I'll take the heat for you, I'll take the hit for you, and I'll say that I'll talk to our supervisor and say that this is unacceptable.
Mhm.
He says, you don't have to, because he knew that like if I did it, they would write me off or they'd say, Eric's just being overreacting. But because this is a person who's really respected within the newsroom,
Mhm.
his word was taken very seriously. And as a result, he killed the peace,
Mhm.
and that was really important because like it was important for me to have someone who I could go to and say this is unacceptable, and for him to lend his credibility, I think was incredibly important. And I should also say, like on the workplace thing, so like I can see both sides of disclosing. Like it's interesting. Like a lot of people ask me, a lot of people, email me like, should I disclose being autistic or things like that? Or like people have asked me otherwise. Or like I remember one time a friend had me answer a question to her advice column, blah, blah, about it. But like I think that like you don't owe anybody disclosure. A, and then and B, like I mean, it was a woman who I interviewed. Her name is Marcel Champion. She's autistic. She says, "I've never not regretted disclosing," and like I can see why. Because like on one end, if you don't disclose, you often can struggle, and people won't take you seriously, or they'll wonder why you're doing well, why you're not doing as well. But on the other end, as soon as you do disclose, people immediately stigmatize or lower expectations or tons of other things. So I can see why both of those, why people would disclose and why they wouldn't disclose is the important thing to say. I think the thing that I would say, and I know this isn't your question, but I think it's important, is like I almost kind of like it's almost kind of important to do like when you're thinking about disclosing, almost kind of do like a vibe check in any office. So like the like I like kind of like the way that I do it, like before, like nowadays I doesn't matter if I disclose, but like when I was earlier in my career, the thing that I would think about is I'd be like, okay, can I get to the office? If I were in a wheelchair, could I get to the office in a wheelchair? That's, if I can't do that, then I'm not disclosing. Second, how many women are in actual leadership positions? I'm not just saying employees, but are in actual leadership positions. How many people of color are in leadership positions? What is their turnover rate? And like, if they pass that kind of 4-point system, then I would be comfortable disclosing. But if it didn't go but if it didn't, if it didn't pass that vibe check, then I wouldn't disclose. And like I think the other thing that's important to recognize is that sometimes, having neurodivergent voices or minds in an office can be good, can be a good thing. I'll give you an example. Is that like another time when I was at work, like I think one of my first days, it was is that like I was in a newsroom and I was just meeting people, and I noticed there was this a lot of women, female coworkers had these banners on the thing like support equal pay, in the newsroom, and like because I guess it was time for bargaining. It was about the time for the bargaining section for the union. And like I remember saying to myself, I was like, I was just curious, and I was just thinking to myself, like, I noticed, and I was like, what can I do as a dude to help? And like this woman, I remember, her name was Whitney. She was like, no guy has ever asked that question. And I was like, they kind of should. And by the way, fellas, if you like literally, you should ask your female coworkers, like, what can you do to help them get equal pay? That's just like a baseline. But like, I think that was one of those things where it was just like, we're like, I don't think had I been neurodivergent, I would have had the wherewithal or the mindset to even ask, like, what can I do as a dude to help? So I think a lot of times dudes just think we don't want to, we should step back because women should lead this front. But like, dudes kind of have a role in equal pay too. So
Yeah, well, and thank you for your thoughts and insights about that as well. I know working here in a university setting and a learning center, we often get the question from students, should I disclose about whatever
Yes.
disability? And that's not an easy not an easy question to answer. So thank you for that
It's a very
insight.
individualized thing. It's
Yeah.
not, same for universities, like you don't owe anybody anything. You only owe yourself what you think is the best choice.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. So again, thank you for these insights. This is wonderful. We're going to stop here and take our break for a few minutes. So for those of you that are here, there are books available for purchase if you would like to. There are refreshments set up all ready to go in the back of your room. So please, in the back of the room. So please help yourself. If you have questions for Eric, please turn in your index cards. A couple of our staff members will be walking around with a basket and look for them, and they will get those. And then we will resume back here about 2:15 or so.
All right, welcome back from the break, everybody. And the second part, as Laura mentioned, are going to be questions from you all here in the room and to our audience who are live streamed right now. So these are great questions. You ready?
All right.
All right, the first
Yep.
one is, tell us more about the origins of the title for your book, We're Not Broken.
Oh, good question. So I cannot take credit for it whatsoever. So the original essay in National Journal was called I'm Not Broken, and it was and we were coming up with different ideas, and then finally what happened was Andy Kohler was one of the editors. I think she was like managing editor. She was a former editor at the New York Post. And like for those like people who know, like they're the ones who do like those great kind of like I love, even if I don't like the content of the New York Post, I love the headlines. And I love like how they basically do these splashy kind of just like super sensational, super outrageous headlines. So like I think that kind of impulse, that was where it was rooted in. And I remember Richard Just, who was the editor who edited that piece, he was just like, what do you think about this idea? And I said, I love it. So then like my agent Heather decided to turn it into We're Not Broken, making it a kind of societal thing. My colleague Andrew Feinberg likes to say that the next book should be We're Not Broken, You Are, for the neurotypicals. But yeah, no, that's but yeah, no, I cannot take credit for it. But I think that it was part of the larger argument that like autistic people are not failed versions of normal, but they're human beings, so that just a different way of being humans.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love the title. And I would buy that next book, by the way.
Yeah.
That's a great title. All right. This is a question you have to channel being a parent or channel your parents. How can parents help promote neurodiversity in our colleges and schools?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think that the most important thing is to, include autistic voices, include neurodivergent, not just autistic, but any kind of neurodivergent voices. Make sure and elevate those voices and push for them. But B, I think the most important thing is to say that this is about the students' well-being. I think that for a long time, especially in academia, a lot of people can be very precious about their research or precious about their preconceived notions of their priors at the expense of autistic people, neurodivergent people. So I think it's important to recognize that, like, at the end of the day, the job of academia is to educate people. And you can't educate people if you're excluding them or if you're creating an environment that's not friendly to them. So I think the most important thing is to say that, is to make sure that we're prioritizing their needs, not anybody else. So, but it's still difficult. I don't think that there's one singular way.
And I would imagine collaborating with teachers and educators and support staff would be a critical piece of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And collaborating is important. I think again, like as I keep on trying to say, I think a lot of people think of these things as versus, autistic people versus parents, or neurodiversity advocates versus educators. And a lot of times they're in the same boat. It's just the scarcity of resources, or or institutions moving really slow, or things being just naturally averse to change, or institutions being averse to change naturally. But a lot of times, it is a collaborative process, and it requires collaboration, and it needs to be almost like a symphony. Everybody in the orchestra has a different role to play.
That's great. I'm also thinking of universal design
Yes,
as
yeah,
a great way.
yeah, absolutely. Universal design is incredibly important. I think that it also removes the barriers when it comes to asking for accommodations, because if something is built in the first place, then that means that there is less of a need to ask for it. And one of the problems with accommodations is it still puts the onus on the person with the disability and less on the classroom or the institution. And it still makes it about personal responsibility when really it should be a collective responsibility. So I think that universal design is definitely a good thing, and promoting universal design is a thing, because what it does is that it argues that, and my friend Ramon has talked about this in an article for the New York Times, that university disability rights is for everyone. And in some ways, what promoting universal design does is that even people who aren't neurodivergent, will see the cascading benefits from it. It's kind of like with curb cuts. People with wheelchairs needed curb cuts, but then what happened? We realized that this works for parents with strollers. So I think that in the same way, universal design is important. And I think it's important to make the case that it's not just for people who are openly or who recognize their neurodivergence, but also for people who may not have gotten the tools to get diagnosed, the resources to get diagnosed, but B, also it could benefit a lot of other people. Like, don't people benefit from having more time on tests? And don't people benefit more from having more straightforward, clear-cut instructions? Like, those are things that benefit a lot of other people.
Yeah, and I love how it takes the onus off of the individual.
Yes.
It's a system onus. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. How can people who are neurotypical be better friends and support friends who are neurodivergent?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think the thing is, obviously, you don't want to just be friends with a neurodivergent person just because to be friends with it. It's like white people just picking a black friend, but it's, but I think the best thing is just treat them like any of your other friends, and as a result, you respond accordingly. My friend Chris Harrison, she likes to say that there's a lot of talk about the golden rule, treating people as you want to be treated. Well, the platinum rule is treating people the way they want to be treated. And I think one of the things is that so a lot of my friends know that I'm neurodivergent. We don't go out to really loud bars, or we don't go out to a place with really fluorescent lighting, because that's just, I'm not going to jive with that. And in the same way, just like in the same way, how if I'm going out to have dinner with a friend of mine who's Muslim, I'm not going to take them to get some pulled pork. I'm going to take them to a place that I know is halal. In the same way, I think it's about respecting people. It's about making sure that, next week, I think, is Yom Kippur. A lot of my friends who are Jewish, I know that I'm not going to be texting them these next few days, So I think it's just about recognizing. I think a lot of people say, the thing that I hear a lot of people say, it's like, oh, it's almost like I don't see race, or I don't see disability. No, I think you need to see the disability. You need to see their race. You need to see their heritage. And you need to respect it, and you need to honor. And I think that's the best thing you can do, is respect people's needs as legitimate.
And did you learn to tell your friends what you needed, or did they learn to ask you? Or how did that work?
A little bit of both, or a few times, we just trial and error. Oh, he likes this thing. Oh, I'd say oh, I don't like this thing, or oh, we like doing this thing together, or oh, this is the thing we really enjoy doing together. So I have friends who weirdly enough, despite having sensory processing stuff, I like going to concerts. So as a result, my friend Sarah, who I knew from here, I'm not here, she's just my concert buddy. But also she knows that if something gets too much for me, sensory wise, we have a way to get out. So if there's too many flashing lights and things like that, then we can leave at any time. In the same respect, there are certain friends who I like to, there are other friends who I like to go out to have dinner with, or who I like to cook with, or who I like to, go book shopping with it. And there's so like, again, it's just about finding the just like with any friend, you find the commonalities and you meet people where they are. I remember when I was interning at the White House, I had a really good friend, his name was Gerwin, and he knew that like by Sunday I was really exhausted and like needed a recharge for the week. So like what we would do is we would just go to this one Barnes and Noble that was downtown, and we would just read the whole time because he was interning in the economics team at the White House. It's like he had to just read these big briefing books. And usually I just want to be reading a book after like socializing a lot on Saturday because, as an autistic person, it takes a lot out of me. So like we would just sit there and we would read, barely say a word to each other. But like those were some of the most meaningful moments of bonding. And Gerwin is still a great friend of mine.
That's great. I love that. A reading friend.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Okay. This is I'm going to broaden this out. Advice for professionals, whether it's a health professional or staff or faculty, in working effectively with teens or young adults. So a little bit younger.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think the most important thing is recognizing that their needs are going to be different, asking them. And growing up, I had a psychiatrist who I still see, and I've been seeing the same psychiatrist since I was 13. And what's interesting is that like anytime my mom and I would go to her, she's one of her name was Dr. Nydia Kolomodisaka. She's from El Salvador. And like anytime that like she would ask me a question, my mom would start, she'd say, not you, him. And like, and God love her for that, she was, because she recognized that at the end of the day, I'm the person who has to live with these things. I'm the person who deals with the consequences. And I think it's important. I think that like I think it's important to just take their needs seriously. I think that a lot of times medical professionals will just chalk up whatever autistic people or any other type of neurodivergent people say. Oh, well, they're autistic, they don't understand what they're saying. Or they'll just say, oh, well, that's just a symptom of autism, rather than, oh, this might be a thing separate from them, or like, maybe we should take this seriously. Like, I remember when I was profiling this woman, Lydia Wayman in my book, like a long time, doctors didn't take her seriously because they said, you sound too happy. Well, it was because she said, people always told her, have a positive attitude. The neurotypicals told her to do that. They've been like, that prevented her from getting her real medical needs met for a long time. So I think it's important to just take them seriously and literally. It's easy for them to do a lot these days.
I love that. This is a great question, I think. Tell us about your experiences with the intersection of autism and ADHD.
Oh, this is really good. I think that you're starting to see more people talk about this because like for a long time, again, like going to the point that we are still, our understanding of autism as we know it is so new. For a long time, people didn't think you could have both. But like, I think that like one of the things I remember reading, incidentally enough, like one of the great places to learn about it is Instagram and TikTok. And like social media is great because it allows people to talk for themselves instead of like having a filter through. But like one of the interesting things is that like a lot, as I joke all the time, like I frequently say autism is listening to the same song 15 times a day. ADHD is pausing that song to look up 5 other different songs. And that's the intersection of the two. But like, it's funny because like what was interesting is that I was watching this now. It was something I saw on Instagram. It was like, studies have shown that like the more, people with ADHD kind of who are also autistic mitigate some of the symptoms of ADHD. Oddly enough, that leads to autistic symptoms becoming more pronounced, oddly enough. So, I mean, it's one of those things that like a lot of times it's weird. Like my friend, how many people know the podcast You're Wrong About? Yeah, so you know Sarah Marshall, right? Yeah, she's amazing. Because like she's asking me that, and it's like it's weird because at some point you don't really know what part is the autism and what part is the ADHD, and at some point you just gotta have to recognize, well, this is the brain that I'm working with, and I just kind of have to adjust accordingly. So it's so there are some times where I'm wondering like what part is this from me, and then other parts. So then sometimes I'm just like, it's just what I'm dealing with. So like I gotta just kind of work with it. So.
I'm feeling Teresa right now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add on to this question. Could you talk a little bit about some of the strengths and the gifts that you think the combination of autism and ADHD might have brought to your work world or your life as a student?
Yeah, that is really interesting. I think in the work world, like what's interesting is that like the autism allows me to focus singularly on this like one thing. But like what I think, and I think that helps as a journalist, especially when you're learning something, but like the ADHD, and I think that need for stimulation and impulsivity, I think almost allows me, and I think this really helps as a journalist to like say like, wait, but I remember this one thing, because like I think a lot of people when they think of ADHD, they tend to think of like the movie Up with the dog where he's like squirrel, but really what ADHD can sometimes do is it'd be like you'll be in the middle of thinking something, you'll be in the middle of talking something, you'll be like, oh wait, yeah, that was the thing that I was literally just thinking about, an hour ago. I wonder if there's a common. I wonder if there's a thing. I wonder if there's a link between those two. So I think that's like sometimes I think that those kind of dueling and sometimes conflicting neurotypes can often lead to kind of a blend and kind of lead to you finding or thinking in a different way or finding common links, being able to kind of learn the ins and outs of everything. That's kind of the autism, but then the ADHD almost finding the links and finding that it doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Seems like it's a really good combination for your
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, I think one of the things is that like sometimes when I'm bored, one of the things I like to do is I like to go through FEC filings. And for those who don't know, the Federal Election Commission, every candidate in every PAC needs to disclose what they spend money on. Literally, like it's federal law. So like sometimes what I'll notice is that like I'll be like sometimes I'll be thumbing through filings just because I'm bored on this Friday night, and then like this is why I'm single, by the way. So and then I'll notice like there's a similar vendor to someone, and I'll be like, wait, I wonder, and then like. Or like that name rings a bell, and then like I'll put it in the back in the database. I'm like, oh, that's where I saw it. And I realized like, oh, these two candidates are using the same vendor, or they're getting, or like the same donor who paid one person is paying the other person, and that's when you realize, oh, okay, there's these common threads, and sometimes that leads to coming to different conclusions. Sometimes.
That's so interesting, and that's a fun Friday night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. This is a totally different kind of question. Have you ever been asked the question, you don't look autistic? And if so, how do you respond to it?
Ooh, good question. I mean, but I get what they're getting at. I think there's, a lot of times when they ask that, I kind of say, well, what do you think autism looks like? When in the back of my mind, I know what they think. They tend to think of like someone typically white, typically adolescent, typically blonde hair, typically, speaks in a very monotone voice, probably knows a lot about computers or trains or whatever. Don't get me wrong, I love a good train, but no, I like Amtrak. I took Amtrak like last week, and like it's great. But like I think the thing that I say, I think that a lot of people were like they flap their hands a lot, and yeah, I flap my hands and I stim a lot. But like I think the thing that I say is that hey, well, what makes you think that? Why do you think that? Who do you know who's autistic? And B, do you recognize that autism is a spectrum? And it's not necessarily like, levels of spice, but it's kind of like a color wheel. And it's like, there's some variations here, some variations there, there's some parts here, parts there. And the other thing that I say is that like, well, a lot of that, and this is the point that I make with, is that like, that Deborah Press makes, is that like, well, a lot of times, we as autistic people learn to mask and we learn to camouflage because because people told us not to act as we or it was repressed or it was suppressed. And so we did it, a lot of times you talk about, we talk a lot about, how hard it is to accommodate people with disabilities. People with disabilities accommodate you all the time. They accommodate neurotypical and abled people every day of their lives to make it comfortable. because they don't want to cause a ruckus,
Mhm.
because they don't want to come off as quote unquote the pissed off disabled person.
Mhm.
So, we accommodate people all the time. And it's weird. I'll give you a real example of like, because then like what's weird is that like at some point you don't know where the masking begins and you end. It's interesting. One of the perfect examples, like I'll use this as an example. When I went to university, when I first came to university, I didn't know the first thing about UNC basketball. I did it. But like what's interesting is that like I knew that my friends liked UNC basketball. So I would go to the bars and watch basketball with them. Or I'd go to the Dean Dome and watch it with friends. Like I remember one time there was like a friend of mine really wanted my phase 1 ticket because she got like a phase 5 ticket. So I was like, look, I don't care 2 wits about it. So like I gave up my phase 1 ticket, and then I told my mom about that, and she's like, "You gave up your phase 1 ticket?" And then, it's like it just kind of didn't mean that much to me. But like the thing that I learned is that like I learned to I would go there and I would do it and I would watch it because I wanted to be around my friends. But then, now I kind of wonder, okay, is it still something I do to like because of friends, or do I actually like it? And then the weird thing is that like, yeah, now I actually kind of like it. So it's weird. It's weird because you don't know where one thing begins and one thing ends. You kind of just you kind of at some point I did the masking. It almost sticks to your face.
Mhm.
But then also, sometimes it can be a good thing, or sometimes when you do it, it can lead to bonding. And in this case, it was a positive thing. So, but other times, I think that like I've definitely masked in a way that it took me a long time to unlearn because it was a response to depression. It was a response to people not wanting me to be there too.
Right. Do you feel like you still have to put on a mask from time to time now?
Sometimes, yeah. Especially like that's one reason why I hate talking on the phone.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how many people have seen the movie Sorry to Bother You. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. There's there's this guy who's a telemarketer and he's black, and then he has a white voice when he's a telemarketer. That's and in the same way, it's like I think it's very difficult sometimes. It's like I notice that like when I'm interviewing people and I'm face to face, I can kind of, it can lead to kind of a freewheeling discussion. I don't feel and fewer inhibitions over time. But I've noticed that when I'm almost masking over the phone because of I notice even when I go back and I listen to recordings of myself, because I record myself just to make sure I don't misquote anybody, I notice my talking, the way I speak is very stilted and it's very staccato. And it's very because I worry about because I can't see somebody, I worry about missing certain cues or missing certain things. So I noticed that the way that I talk and the way that I try to present myself is a very inoffensive version of myself.
Mhm.
But oftentimes that comes to the risk of because if I'm talking to someone like in person, that can lead to a more freewheeling dialogue that can often elicit better results. So yeah, absolutely. I feel that sometimes.
Mhm.
Interesting. We have a few questions that are related to job interviews.
Sure.
Like, so things employers might benefit from knowing when interviewing candidates, what candidates might need to think about in terms of disclosing
Yeah.
before an interview so can you talk a little bit about that general
Yeah,
idea?
yeah. I mean, I think that I think that you're seeing a lot of you are seeing a lot of employers begin hiring initiatives, autism hiring initiative. SAP does a really big one. Microsoft is a really big one. Goldman Sachs and UBS both do them. EY does them. But I think that one of the things that on top of that, and this isn't really related to your question, but I mean, this isn't directly your question, but I think it's important. I think that like, I don't want to rag on them because I think they're important. JP Morgan and Chase does it too. But I think before you open any of these autism hiring initiatives or autism at work initiatives, whether you know it or not, you have autistic and neurodivergent employees. So you need to create a culture where they're open, where they can feel comfortable to disclose. For the people who are already there, they don't need to worry about risking their job and things like that. Because all the hiring initiatives in the world means a hill of beans. if people don't stay, or if they, kind of crash and burn or grow and leave, as my friend John Marble likes to say. So it's really important, I think, to set it up. But I think in job interviews, I'll give you a perfect example of a job interview. Is that I remember one time I had a job interview at a news outlet, and I knew that this one editor at this one outlet had a reputation for being, who's very aggressive, so to speak, a very hard charging person. So I sat down with him and he says, I've heard a lot of great things about you. And I was like, thank you, sir. And he's like, what have you heard about me? And thank God I'd done my homework before. I remember worrying about it. I remember thinking to myself, well, I think I said something I think that from what I've read is that you expect a lot from your employees, no more than you do yourself. It's a very diplomatic kind of shake your hand kind of. But I think that's why, I think the job interviews, it's why you see companies like SAP getting rid of job interviews. And they now have Lego challenges and things like that. And I think that job interviews might not necessarily be the best thing, especially if you're someone who's neurodivergent, they may not necessarily make eye contact, and they might not necessarily, and people might see that as a sign of disrespect. Well, in my mind, if I make eye contact with you, I'm not going to be able to focus on what you're telling me. I need to be able to look away. I need to be able to not look at you. Otherwise, actually making eye contact with you right now, I'm not going to be able to focus on what you're saying. So I think that's one of the things. I think it requires changing assumptions about what makes a good employee, because you can't think. I think that the whole idea of a job interview is it's terrible. It doesn't tell you the first thing about what kind of an employee someone would be. They're putting on an act for you. So you want to talk about masking? Everybody masks when they're doing a job interview, and half of you mask when you went on your first day with your significant other. So but I think that's important. I think that kind of shows the kind of utility of job interviews. And by the way, going to the point about curb cuts, is that that's one of those things that I think a lot of neurotypical people would benefit if we got rid of job interviews. So I think that's one thing. I think you talk also about disclosure and disclosing at work. Again, I think that it really depends on the situation, and it depends on because people have asked me do I think that my being neurodivergent is costing some jobs? My answer to that is kind of look, maybe it did, but would those be the types of jobs I'd want to work in the first place? Would I want to work in a place that isn't really accepting of neurodivergent people? Not really. So in a weird way, it's kind of self-sorting, but in the other way, but other times, some people especially if you work in some trades where there isn't a lot of acceptance, I don't begrudge anybody if they don't want to disclose. That's their business. And especially if you need to provide for yourself, or you're low income, or you need to provide for your family, I can completely understand why you wouldn't. So, it's very, very case by case basis. And it's why I tell people look, you don't have a duty to disclose.
Because some applications have the box that asks you to.
Yeah. And it was funny because when I was applying for part-time jobs, when I was in high school, I initially did, and I would never hear back from these jobs. And I've wondered how many times it's is it because I had disability, or is it because of something else? It might just be because I suck, but but you can't help but wonder, really when you're hiring a part-time employee for somebody in high school, how competent do you really think they're going to be? There's no shame in that one. There's dignity in work for everything, but it's if you really think that someone being disabled, in my opinion, being 15 is more of a hindrance to someone being able to do a good job than being disabled. No, because how many of you were good workers when you were 15? Or doing your job because you don't have any work experience. So in my opinion, being a teenager is a bigger impediment than being.
Well, that's a great segue to this next question.
Yeah. I hope I don't offend any teenagers.
No. Okay. I have not seen the show Love on the Spectrum, but it's a show on Netflix. We talked about it a little bit. And I think it's with teenagers. Or young
Teenagers,
adults?
young
Young
adults, yeah.
adults, okay. So thoughts on exposing the abnormality, this is a quote from the card, the abnormality of falling in love, dating for people on the spectrum.
Yeah, so I haven't seen disclosure. I haven't seen the American version of Love on the Spectrum. But what I've heard is that it had actual input from autistic people. Because like I watched the original Love on the Spectrum, the Australian version, during the pandemic when like there were like a million different dating shows on Netflix, and like it very much when I watched it, my reaction was fine. But you could tell it wasn't made by autistic people. Because there were many times when I was watching it that like it felt very much like watching the Animal Planet. And like, it felt like I was like, I don't know if it was one of those things where I was like, I don't know if I should be watching this. And it wasn't like it was because it was anything inappropriate. It was just like, you could tell that like they felt that these very intimate, because dating is when you're sharing your most intimate personal self. And I felt like, I wouldn't want to see this if neurotypical people were dating.
Mhm.
And I felt like because they were autistic, the producers, the directors almost felt they had a license to do it. So it wasn't the worst thing. Okay, I'll say that. Like it wasn't Sia like in her movie. But like how many people know about that whole thing?
What's it called?
Sia, the singer, did a whole movie about autism that was just terrible. So it wasn't the worst. I think that they had great intentions. You could definitely tell it was made by non-autistic people for non-autistic people to kind of consume and gawk at. And it kind of made me feel uncomfortable. What again wasn't terrible, but made me feel uncomfortable. I need to actually sit down. I'll probably watch it this weekend or something. I keep on saying I need to watch the American version. I heard it won an Emmy. A lot of my friends who are autistic have watched it and loved it. So like, but I can't say I've seen it. So
Have you found any TV shows or movies that you think do a fair representation?
Oh, good question. I think Community did a great job with their character. I think Bob's Burgers with Tina Belcher. These are characters who they're not explicitly autistic, but like they definitely hinted at it. I think that some documentaries have done a better job of that. I think that it's one of those things that still needs work. You can still tell that there aren't a lot of autistic creators. I think that so there was that Netflix show, Atypical. It got a lot of good reviews from neurotypicals, but it didn't get a lot from a lot of autistic people. And like what I worry about with, on one end, I was glad that autistic people were able to speak out and say, no, we don't like this. But on the other hand, like I worry that the entertainment industry almost learned the wrong lesson, because the right lesson for the entertainment industry was should have been, we should have more autistic stories by autistic people. The wrong lesson that I worry that Hollywood says, we're not going to do stuff about autism ever because it's too controversial. Because look, Hollywood's a business. I understand. I don't want to say Hollywood. The entertainment industry is a business. I understand they don't want to court controversy, unless controversy leads to cash. I worry that the entertainment industry sees it. Okay, we got a lot of people who are mad about this when we tried to do something with autism. That means we shouldn't do anything. No, what it should do is it should lead to you wanting to promote content made by autistic people. I have a friend of mine who's autistic. She's a TV writer in another country, and she said that like she's had a difficult time getting producers and studios to bite because they saw what happened with movies like Music and Atypical, and they just were like, we don't want controversy, when that wasn't the lesson they should have learned. They should have learned, hey, this is an autistic person who made a show, maybe promote it.
Room for improvement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have one more question that we can ask you. This is going to be a total diversion from this Love on the Spectrum question.
Sure.
As far as the diagnosis and treatment of autism. So interesting that you were born, as you said, like the
Yeah.
ink was still wet when you were
Yes.
for the ADA. So as far as where the diagnosis and treatment of autism is, where are we now, do you think, and where should we be heading?
Oh, good question. So, I mean, I think that literally when I was a student here at UNC in 2013, that was when they put all the diagnoses of like autism, Asperger's syndrome, PDD-NOS, that was when they all put them into what's now known as autism spectrum disorder. That was, I think, a positive development because I think it recognized that like there are no gradations of autism, and people who we often think of as high functioning might have challenges and difficulties, and people who we consider low functioning have incredible gifts and incredible capacity to do things that we would otherwise expect. I think as far as where we are now, you're starting to see the racial diagnosis gap close, which is a good thing. Which is to say that like a lot of times people of color used to get, and non-white autistic people tended to get misdiagnosed or diagnosed later or go undiagnosed at all. I think that you're starting to see, according to the latest CDC studies, starting to see that gap close. That's a good thing. You're starting to see the gender gap close. So a lot of girls get overlooked. That has changed a lot. That is a good thing. We are recognizing now that LGBTQ plus people have a greater propensity to be on the autism spectrum. That like I joke with my friends that like when I go to Pride in DC, I'm more likely to be around neurodivergent people than when I'm around a lot of heterosexual people. So we're seeing those things. I think that we are moving more toward a neurodiversity model where we're seeing more people wanting to focus more on lifetime issues or lifespan issues rather than just curing. I think where we should go is that the majority of research dollars still go. So we spend something like $350 million in research in the United States, combined with government dollars and nonprofit dollars on researching autism. The majority of that money still goes to biology and risk factor and quote unquote treatment issues. Only altogether 5 or 10%, goes toward lifespan issues or services. That there's nothing inherently wrong about researching biology. But when that much money crowds out the other one, I think that we definitely need to redistribute the pie, so to speak, and we need to make it more even, because regardless of whether you think autism should be cured or shouldn't be cured, I personally don't think it should be, or I don't think you can cure it. I think we're dealing with autistic people now, and autistic people now need life services and need to deal with lifespan issues. And autistic people now are gonna eventually I'm gonna grow old, hopefully. A lot of people from my generation gonna grow old. And we're gonna need to figure out what are the things that they're gonna need for their lifespan issues. Because for a long time, autism has probably been with us as long as humanity, but we didn't think of a lot of times our ancestors, they were in institutions already, or they died early. The lifespan issue for a long time for autistic people was 35, so there's just this idea that autistic people couldn't age or grow up. Just in the same way that we thought the same thing with Down syndrome, but the lifespan for people with Down syndrome has gone up tremendously. That is a huge scientific progress, even though that number got kind of shaved off during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that we need to focus more on lifespan issues. We need to focus more on services issues and focus more on transition, like transition from high school to college. Personally, some people suggest that we should start focusing on the freshman year of high school. I think we should start on it as early as 6th grade, but that's just me. So, those, I think that we need to focus. I think that those are some of the many things. And then, of course, like I said, still focusing on, I think we also need to focus on the fact that the biggest killers of people with of autism, for people without intellectual disabilities, are suicide and heart disease. The biggest killers for autistic people with intellectual disabilities, I think, are epilepsy and a few other conditions. we aren't researching a lot about the causes of death for those things. Like we still need to focus on those.
This is so many good ideas. I'm thinking of all your next books that you
Yeah.
can write about this topic. But yeah, I just love the thought of the aging. You know, like how are we going to support and
Yeah.
better understand the needs as people
And
age?
it's a real thing that we're now seeing autistic people live longer. Like, I think that whenever you talk about aging, you say like, there's always talk about the gray tsunami, but like, no, that just means that like, it's a good thing that they're not dying at an early age. But that also means that because we haven't thought about it, we should start thinking about it.
Thank you. And I think we are officially out of time. So, Eric, this was so
Thank you so
wonderful, and we're so grateful for your time and all the ways that you have taught us. Can we give him a round of applause?
Thank you so much. It feels amazing to be on. I feel like The Rock. Finally, like, you know, Carolina is home. It was the first place that really felt like home. I grew up moving around a lot, but like this is home. This is family, and this is an important place. And if it's going to be the university of the people, it needs to be the university of everybody, including neurodivergent people.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to speak on Laura's behalf just to say a couple of things, and then maybe Kim will want to come up at the tail end. So just thank you again, and thank you to our audience and to the audience coming to us virtually. For anyone who's wanting CEU credits, they are available, certificates are available at the table out front. And if you were online and you're interested in CEU credits, then you can email the Learning Center. If you go to our website, learningcenter.unc.edu, you cannot miss it. And so that's how you do that. A program evaluation will be mailed to you. This is for everybody. Will be emailed to you. And we really appreciate your feedback. We love collecting data in the Learning Center, so please give us that. If you are an in-person attendee, book signing, right over there, and books are there. He's gonna have a pen, follow him. And that concludes the program.